The purpose of this video will be to provide a brief overview to Chapter 1 in our textbook. Chapter 1 provides an introduction and an overview of business analytics, and the chapter is pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to attempt to belabor any of the points here in this lecture that are covered in the book. But more so just try to point you to some of the topics that are, I guess, most relevant or most important. And then at the end, I will go through and take a look at the two assignments, so actually one assignment and one discussion related to Chapter 1, and dive into that a little bit. Okay? So like I said, the chapter gives you an overview of an introduction to business analytics and a definition of business analytics being the process of transforming data into actions via analysis and gaining insights in the context of organizational decision making and problem solving. So it defines business analytics as kind of being at the intersection of information systems or information technology, statistics, and operations management. And in this course, we're going to spend a lot of time working in the area of statistics to analyze the data that we obtain from information systems, so that we can gain meaning from that data, visualize what it's telling us, and use it to help us make decisions or to recommend decisions to be made. Later in the course, we'll take a little bit of a look at modeling and a couple chapters associated with how to use models and optimization for decision making. The scope of business analytics in general is categorized into three main areas. Descriptive analytics, that's the use of data to understand past and current business performance and to make informed decisions, or to look at the impact of decisions that were made in the past. Predictive analytics is used to predict the future by examining historical data, looking for relationships or patterns in that data, and then extrapolating those relationships forward in time to predict what may happen based on past performance. And then lastly, prescriptive analytics, which is identifying the best alternatives or the optimization to either minimize or maximize an objective. So in this course, we're going to concentrate on descriptive analytics in chapters 3 through 7. And predictive analytics in chapters 8 through 11. We're not going to really touch on prescriptive analytics throughout this course. The chapter goes on to also provide you with some standard definitions that we'll use throughout the course, starting with data and information. Data just simply being numerical or textual facts or figures that are collected. And information is the meaning that we extract from that data through analysis. A data set, simply a collection of data, and a database is a collection of related files containing information. Example 1.2 in the textbook gives you an example of a sales transaction database and shows you the different records and fields and attributes associated with that particular example of a database file. It goes on to talk about metrics and data classification, a metric being a unit of measure that we use to objectively quantify performance. Measurement is the act of obtaining that data with the metric, and measures are the values or the numerical values associated with the metric. He goes on to talk about measurement scales and different types of data. And this is one area of the chapter that you'll want to pay particular attention and make sure that you have a good understanding of these four different types of data, being categorical data, ordinal data, interval data, and ratio data. The textbook provides an explanation of each of those, and it has an example or two to go through. Also, I've found a video on YouTube, it's about 5 minutes, that does a real good job of explaining those 4 different types of data. It's important that you understand the difference between those 4 types of data, as the type of data that you're dealing with will then be suggestive of what type of statistical analysis you either can or should perform on that data, as well as the types of visual presentations that best fit that type of data. So in both Assignment 1A and Discussion 1A, part of those assignments will be to classify data into one of those 4 categories, being either nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio data. So pay particular attention to that section of the chapter. Example 1.3 goes through and shows you some examples of those different types of data. And then lastly, there is discrete data and continuous data. Discrete data is something that you would derive from counting, say the number of customers that arrived at the store during an hour, the number of deliveries that were early, the number of deliveries that were on time, that kind of thing. Continuous data is data that's based on a continuous scale of measurement. So here we're talking about things like weight, time, volume, dollars as far as financial data. They are what is called continuous data. So again, you want to make sure that you're able to identify whether data is discrete or whether it's continuous. Again, that will give you some insight into what types of analysis can or should be used to analyze that data. Next, the chapter goes in to talk a little bit about using models in business analytics. Models are simply a mathematical abstraction or representation of a real-life system or idea. We will go into models in depth in Chapter 11, I think it is. So don't worry too much in Chapter 1 here about spending too much time on models. Go through, read that section, make sure you understand the examples that they give you there. But like I said, we'll come back and dive into models much more deeply in Chapter 11. And then lastly, the chapter goes through structured problem solving with analytics. So if any of you are familiar with Lean or Six Sigma or the DMAIC methodology, it's a structured problem solving methodology that takes you through structured steps in defining, analyzing, and putting together a solution or an improvement to a problem, and then implementing that solution and monitoring. So this textbooks talk about the same thing here, same type of concept, with a 6-step process of business analytics or problem solving with business analytics, which starts with recognizing the problem, defining the problem, structuring and analyzing the problem, interpreting the results and making a decision, and then lastly, implementing the decision. So in this course, most of our focus is going to be on steps 3, 4, and 5, structuring and analyzing the problem and interpreting the results to determine what type of decision can or should we make based on the data at hand. So that's where we'll spend the heart of our efforts here in this course, or on steps 3, 4, and 5. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into chapters 3 and 4 and onward. Okay, so lastly, let's talk about the assignments associated with Chapter 1. So we have Assignment 1A, which is Performance Lawn Equipment, and Discussion 1A, which is Drought Advertising. So in both of these, they give you a file of data, business data, and ask you to perform some analysis on that data. As we go through each chapter, we'll come back and apply the concepts of each chapter to that data throughout the rest of the course. For Chapter 1, we're simply going to look at both of these as far as looking at the data in those files and classifying them along those 4 data types. nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio types of data. So let's take a look at assignment 1A specifically here. At the end of chapter 1, it will give you an overview of the performance lawn equipment business and give you some explanation of the data that is in the file that is attached to the assignment here. This is an Excel file that has data for performance lawn equipment. And then also in that, it will give you your instructions for what you are to do for assignment 1A for chapter 1. So like I said, it's basically taking a look at that data and then classifying whether it is ordinal, ratio, interval, or nominal data. So this spreadsheet has 23 workbooks. I'm not going to ask you to go through and classify all 23. Instead, what I'd like you to do is I have put together an answer form, and I've grouped each of those workbooks into groups. Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, Group 4, Group 5, etc. What I'm going to ask you to do is just pick one workbook from each of those groups, so a total of 5 workbooks, and then classify the data within that workbook as to being either nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. Record your results here on this spreadsheet and then turn that spreadsheet in when you submit your assignment. This spreadsheet is located out in the Week 1 resources file. So make that straightforward enough. For drought advertising, very similar. It gives you data that was assembled from a series of questionnaires that were given to customers. And in chapter 1, they explain each one of those survey categories and what they were aiming at and what the data was looking for. And then here in the spreadsheet, we have the data. So again, what you'll do for discussion 1A is to classify each of these data variables as either nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio data. Okay? And then lastly, it asks you what type of insight might we gain from the data associated with stereotype and empowerment. And really all we're doing here is asking you to just eyeball that data, see if you can, just by looking at it, if you can kind of see some patterns or maybe suggest some things. Maybe you want to go into this spreadsheet and sort it by either empowerment or stereotype from high to low, top to bottom. See if that might suggest something. Or maybe sort it by one of these other categories, say education or gender. And then eyeball stereotype and empowerment based on that sorting and see if maybe that suggests something. So again, we're just eyeballing it and seeing if maybe that suggests something to us. What you want to do for discussion 1A is you'll want to write up your findings as an email. And an email, think of it as an email to your other business colleagues, giving them your perspective and your initial analysis of this data. We want to submit that initial analysis by the end of Thursday of week 1, and then each student will be asked to comment on the posting of your fellow students throughout the rest of the week. And each student will need to respond to 2 submissions of each of or 2 submissions from 2 of your fellow students that have posted their analysis. So that's pretty much it for Chapter 1 and the assignments for associated with Chapter 1.